Okay, welcome to part 8 of our brainwashing series. As far as rail worker death investigation reports by the Transportation Safety Board. And in this video, we're going to be looking specifically at the conductor trainee's situational awareness. Okay, so on page 3 of this report, we have here the timeline pertaining to what happened that day. When they arrived at the Murphy's location. And we're told basically that the conductor's task had to do with spotting cars, operating a derail, operating a switch, walking 3,600 feet of train, so that's over half a mile, spotting the cars set off, applying handbrakes to secure the cars that were set off, and then since the trainee was out of visual range, he was monitoring the trainee via radio. Well, the trainee should not have been out of range like this because that was a clear violation of SOR 87-150, which prevents a person who has not qualified from working in an occupational category unless they've qualified for that category. Then here under 1740, you can see that the SBU, which is a sense and braking unit, which is a unit that is put at the back of a train and it's got that big red flashing light. They used to have a caboose at the end of a train. Now it's this sense and braking unit. So it's just for people to see that there's a train up ahead when you see this big flashing red light. So that's what a sense and braking unit is. That was supposed to be put on the tail end of the train after setting off the required empty cars. So this right here, 1740, tells us that that sense braking unit was supposed to be put back on the train. It wasn't. And that may be part of the problem too. But anyway, then if you go down, the trainee reverse switch TS-23 and remove the derail on the interchange track located just north of the main track. So that would be the uppermost track here, okay? So that's where he was working, was on this uppermost interchange track. And let's see. So he prepared for this, he was preparing the track for the setting off of 20 empty cars. So to do that, he had to remove the derail that was located on the interchange track so that it wouldn't derail the train as it backed up, or the rail cars. And he would have to replace that derail back on the track after the cars had been set off or dropped off on that top northernmost track. Okay, so let's see. If you go down here, it says that, the 20 cars were set off, and after the train left the interchange track, the trainee placed switch TS-23 in the normal position for the main track movement. So if you follow the large arrow here all the way, it shows how at 1747 or 5:47 p.m., the trainee had already switched this switch, TS-23, which was marked TS-23, but which everyone else on the crew referred to as TS-15. There was no TS-15 there. So this trainee is working in the dark, and other crew members refer to this switch as TS-15. It's marked TS-23, adds to the confusion. Especially when he was not familiar with the territory and he's working in the dark alone, unsupervised. Anyway, so he had flipped this switch back to the normal position. And the reason he did that after the rail cars had been dropped off, those 20 rail cars in the uppermost track, was because the train had pulled forward again, and now it was going to prepare to drop off train cars on the lower two sets of tracks next to the elevator. And so you can see here it says that the conductor reversed the mainline track switch TS-22. So if you follow under point 1757, that arrow, you can see where the conductor was the one who switched the switch. He reversed the switch that was labeled TS22, but in reality, in the witness statements, the conductor referred to this switch as TS13. So again, we have an issue of where are they getting these numbers? Is it in outdated location manuals or operations guides? Is it in work orders for the day that are pulling incorrect information as far as the track switch numbers? Where are they getting these track switch numbers, which the trainee who is new to the territory would not be familiar with? So if you were talking about TS12, TS13, TS15, say to a conductor who's a conductor trainee new to the area, it would be a rather confusing situation as far as the impact on his overall situational awareness. If somebody's telling you flip this switch and they're giving you the wrong number. So again, it was the conductor who had reversed TS22, also known as TS13, in order to then have the train drop off cars for the lower two tracks. And then let's see, after that it says the trainee had planned to place the SBU, that end of train unit, on the tail end car of the 14 cars which were left behind the locomotive, which were now on the main track adjacent to switch TS23, and then place switch TS22 in the normal position and apply both derails to protect against an unintended movement of the cars they had just spotted. So they're saying here the trainee had planned to place the SBU. Okay, that maybe, but then this part here where I have an arrow going up to where it says TS22, it says that he had planned to then place switch TS22 in the normal position. So they're saying, if you look at the diagram here, this conductor trainee who was working on the northernmost tracks and operating TS15 or TS23 was now also said to have planned to go down to the elevator track switches and move this TS22 to the normal position. Well, is that true? I kind of suspect it may not be. And in my opinion, this is an assumption written into the report because they're saying the trainee had planned to place switch TS22 in the normal position. Well, I think it's an assumption, given the trainee was only supposed to work with the interchange track, which is the top northernmost track, which only had one switch, namely TS23, not TS22. And if you look at the bottom here, the very last arrow I have on the very last footnote shows that the two switches were about 282 feet apart. So let's look a little more closely at what was going on that day. Okay, so why do I say that I think this bottom part here where it says that the trainee had planned to place switch TS22 in the normal position? I don't believe that's to be the case. I think this is an assumption that they're making in writing this report, and I think they're writing that this way for a reason, to put the blame on the conductor trainee basically. And I'll show you why I think this is. If you look at the top here, I've changed the coloring to a green. Okay, under 1735, it says the conductor's task in spotting the cars included, and this is not the conductor trainee, this is the supervising conductor. Okay, so his task was operating a derail. Note what I've really underlined here, operating a switch. That means one switch. okay? Then walking 3,600 feet of train, spotting the car set off, applying handbrakes, and once the trainee was, and since the trainee was out of visual range, monitoring the trainee by radio. So they're clearly talking about the supervising conductor here and saying that his task that day was to operate a switch. Well, we've got an inconsistency here because if you look at 1757, down in this paragraph, it says the conductor, that would be the supervising conductor, reversed the main line track switch TS22, okay, and removed the derail as he prepared for the set-offs and stuff. But then it says the conductor was positioned at the after they dropped off, the first set of cars. He positioned himself at the end of the track where it was TS21, which is also known as TS12. That's how he referred to it in his witness statement, to make the cut after the first 11 cars were set off in track TS21 and in preparation for setting off the remaining 33 cars in track 22. So they what the point is here is that the conductor clearly operated not one switch, but two. So why would they say that his job was to only operate one that day, when clearly in this lower paragraph, he absolutely was the person who operated the two switches closest to the elevator for the bottom two elevator tracks? So why the inconsistency? I think it's because they're trying to put the blame, as you'll see further on the conductor trainee, that he's the one who made the mistake. And so by saying that the conductor's task was only to operate a switch, they make it look like, okay, well, his job was only TS21, and it was the conductor trainee that messed up on the two top switches, and so it's his fault that he died, right? That's kind of what it looks like. Anyways, let's go on and see if we can have anything else that would kind of further confirm what I'm suspecting here. Okay, on this slide, I've again hidden here the picture of track switch 22. It's provided in the normal position when the switch was actually in reverse position. So again, part of the confusion as far as I'm concerned in how they write these reports, let's, twist all the facts and, you're less likely to figure it out if everything's twisted, right? In my humble opinion. Anyways, I hide pictures because there is a potential copyright issue that if they hire a photographer to go out there, the photographer may still own the copyright to the picture. So I hide that. But anyway, you can see it in the report. If you pull up the report, you'll see what the switch looked like. Anyways, if we go on here, on page 4, it says, the part that I've underlined here, the trainee was instructed by the conductor via radio to place the main track switch, TS22, in the normal position in preparation for a reverse movement of 20 car lengths to pick up the conductor. Now here's what that means. First of all, I want you to notice that if the trainee had planned to move track switch 22, he shouldn't have had to have been told again by the conductor to do so. But we are clearly told here at 1816 that he was instructed by the conductor to place the main track switch. Now I want you to notice something here. The TS22 is in brackets. Now, why is that important? Well, both TS22, which is also known as TS13, and TS15 or TS23, both touch the main track. So, without having the actual radio communications, did the conductor only say, place the main track switch in normal position? Well, if you've got switch numbers that don't match potentially what's in the work orders or in your operating manuals, and you're in the dark, working alone, unsupervised, when you've got problems with switching operations and with working independently, and CN knew that, and you have no supervising conductor there to double check your work, as should have been the case because conductor trainees are not allowed to work alone, which, if it was only communicated to him, switch the flip the switch on the main, flip the main track switch. Well, which one? There potentially could be two of them. That's my point there. And the reason that they wanted track switch 22, which is TS 13 here, to be flipped to the normal position would be after the train. You've got 3 locomotives here on the main track, and then there were actually 14 rail cars tied to that. So that had pulled forward in an eastward direction, okay, past track switch 15 or track switch 23, as it was actually labeled. So it had moved forward. And now, because the conductor on the bottom tracks, the 2 elevator tracks, was going to be done his work, rather than having him walk all the way up to where the locomotives were with the 14 rail cars, he was going to be going through the tracks and basically going up north on the main track, positioning himself towards the main track, where the train would then be backing up all the way to where he was located to pick him up, rather than having him walk all the way in the dark up to where the locomotives and stuff were. So that's why that switch, TS22, or also known as TS13, according to the conductor witness statement, that's why that switch, which is the lower red one, which hits the main track, had to be in normal position for the train to get back and back up on the main track to pick him up. So when they're talking here also about that they needed that switch in normal position in preparation for a reverse movement of 20 car lengths. They're not talking about reversing 20 cars. What they're talking here about is a distance that they were saying, well, the train, which had 14 cars tied to it, was now going to be backing up a distance that would be equivalent to about 20 rail car lengths. And so that's a distance they're giving you here. But the way that it's worded, if this is how it was communicated to the trainee, go and flip the main track switch with no distinction as to TS22 or TS21. Again, why is TS22 in brackets here? Why didn't they just say, to switch main track TS22 altogether? Did they add this in the report, but it wasn't actually part of the conversation? So was the main track switch specified, is the point, as to which one was supposed to be put in normal position, so in order to back up and pick up that conductor. And then if you go and look further down, it says the trainee was also instructed to place the SBU into the locomotive rather than attaching it to the tail end car. The crew had planned to take the remaining 14 cars to the next location, turn the engines around, and then attach the SBU on their way back home to their terminal. So then it says here, again, underlined in purple, okay, it says to complete this task, the trainee needed to line switch TS22, now it's not in brackets, to the normal position in order for the train to reverse on the main track to pick up the conductor. Okay, why are they putting that in there? It's like they're adding this little sentence in there, to complete this task, which he didn't do. He did it wrong. And so I'm thinking that this sentence is added in here to say this is what he should have done, but he didn't do it, and so he ended up getting killed as a result of his own fault. Is that really the case? I don't think so. Let's keep looking here. Instead of lining TS22, the trainee inadvertently reversed switch TS23, which lined it for the interchange track, and then he reported on the radio that the mainline switch had been lined and locked in the normal position. Okay, again, mainline switch. He reported that the mainline switch had been lined and locked in the normal position for the main track. No confirmation here as to which mainline switch. Was it TS22 or TS23? And again, there was nobody there as a supervising conductor to double check his work to ensure that it had been done properly. And again, he's working in the dark in unfamiliar territory alone in violation of regulation SOR 87-150, section 5. So then it says, the crew acknowledged the radio transmission as required. They did everything right. They acknowledged the radio transmission. However, the entire crew was unaware that the train was being routed into the wrong track, which was the track where the conductor trainee was now installing a derail. And to install that derail, there's a general operating instruction, I think it's 12.8 or something like that, on how to put in a derail. And CN requires the employee to be positioned between the tracks in order not to hurt their back, whatever. You know, maybe being protecting your life is a little more important than hurting your back, especially when there's not a supervising conductor there to act as a lookout when you have your back to a potential oncoming movement. There was nobody there to look out for that trainee. So, yeah, they did everything right. They acknowledged his radio transmission, okay? But here's the problem. Garbage in, garbage out. With nobody there to verify that he had flipped the proper switch, which would have been TS22 as opposed to TS23, there was nobody to prevent the accident, which happened because he had no supervising conductor, because CN was violating the law by allowing a conductor trainee to work alone. And I'm not putting the blame on the supervising conductor here, because it would come out in the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada hearings pertaining to this death that the conductor had never been trained in how to properly supervise a conductor trainee. So the blame, in my opinion, 100% on CN Rail. Now, if you look at the bottom here, it just confirms that he had his back to the train as he worked to secure the derail. So the reason he had his back, again, to the oncoming movement is because he was required, according to CN's operating instructions, to be positioned between the rails when you install a derail. So 100% on CN as far as I'm concerned, as far as this person's death. Okay, now the reason to me that further solidifies the fact that the conductor, the supervising conductor, was the one who was supposed to work those two switches, TS21 and TS22, are the two switches that were tied to the elevator tracks, whereas TS23, also known as TS15 by the crew, that was for the northernmost interchange track. But if you look here, and this would be on page 2, since the next page is page 3, but on page 2 of this report, it says under timestamp 1730, just prior to arriving there, a job briefing was conducted between the conductor and trainee regarding the work to be performed at Murphy's. The conductor agreed to look after the elevator tracks, while the trainee would attend to the interchange track. The interchange track. There's only one northernmost interchange track, and hence only one switch tied to that interchange track, the northernmost one where the trainee would have been working. And so it very much appears that it was the job of the conductor to work with the other two switches for those bottom two tracks. And again, that appears to be very much what happened. And, the fact that later there's a radio communication saying, turn the main line switch to normal, if it wasn't specified which switch number, that would be a huge issue, because there are two switches that touch the main track. And again, the conductor was working alone in the dark in unfamiliar territory. He may have wandered closer to track switch 22 or track switch 23, thinking it was track switch 22. He's working alone in the dark. So again, with nobody there to supervise his work, of course accidents are going to happen. He was a trainee. So again, to me, the blame is 100% on CN. So just to note again, the interchange track, that is singular. And it only TS15 was used for the interchange track being worked by the conductor trainee. Per the job briefing he had been given, he would be working that switch, that track only, and per the job briefing, the conductor would be working the lower two tracks, which would mean the lower two switches. So confusion, misunderstanding, when one person's dead, you don't get to hear his side of the story and why there was confusion and why he did what he did. So you have to look between the lines, you have to look at the facts and see if they add up. And when I see inconsistencies like this in reports, that the conductor was supposed to operate a switch, when lower down it clearly shows that he was operating two switches, those type of inconsistencies, folks, have to be explained. So okay, so on this slide, I just basically wanted to give you a summary of the events that happened at this particular location, because the diagram here is actually supposed to be how things were at the time of the accident. But if you look here at point 1, it says the conductor detrained, he was to operate switch TS22. And I'm taking this from the timeline. These bullet points are taken directly from the timeline. So the conductor detrained in the area of the elevators, and he was supposed to operate TS22. Well, TS22 is where just to the left of the box with number 1 there. Then the conductor trainee detrained, he was to operate switch TS23. So he detrained, the train had moved forward on the main track, and he detrained close to this switch TS23. Because he had to reverse it, the train had pulled completely past the switch for him to detrain off the back of the train and then flip that switch so that a movement could then be made to move 20 cars into that northernmost track. So, point 3, the trainee put the SBU on the ground, reversed TS23, and removed the derail from the interchange track. And then, point 4, 20 cars were set off and secured on the interchange track. Point 5, way at the top here, the trainee put TS23 in normal position. So he had already put that switch in normal position for the train to then back up past TS23 and then drop off cars on the lower 2 elevator tracks. So the trainee had done everything right so far. He had done his movements, removed the derail. Now he had flipped this switch, point 5, back to the normal position. Okay? Then the supervising conductor reversed TS22. And again, I'm taking that from the timeline. So it's the supervising conductor that flipped the lower red switch labeled TS22 here, which also hits the main track in order to bring rail cars down on the elevator tracks on the south side of the main track. Okay, so he also removed the derail to set off cars in the elevator tracks. Now, 11 cars were set off, and then 33 cars were set off, and the cars were secured on those two bottom tracks. It says the trainee returned to the main line as he was going to install the SBU on the back of the train, on the back where there was 14 rail cars left. But he was told not to do that. But that's why he had walked in that direction, was because in his mind, oh, I have to install the SBU. And even if you're going, if you were going to back up to pick up the conductor on the main track, it would be nice to have the SBU on the back of the train also, so that the conductor can see where the train is at when it's backing up on the main track. So the conductor, had done everything right to this point. Okay, so if you continue here, point 9, the trainee was instructed to place the mainline switch in normal position. But again, which mainline switch? If you look in the lower section here, on the very bottom right, where the green arrow shows, again, that TS22 is in brackets. Was that added in by the report writers? And in actuality, he was only told to switch the mainline switch to normal position, and the switch was not specified as to whether or not it should have been TS23 or TS22. I kind of suspect that may be the case. So the trainee was only supposed to handle the interchange track, the northernmost one, per the job briefing. But now things had changed, and he was being told, to basically handle a track switch, which they had agreed per the job briefing would be handled by the conductor. So, because that would have been part of the elevator track switches. And the conductor had indeed already reversed that for the first train movements coming to the southernmost two tracks. So if the conductor was already working TS22, why would the conductor trainee think that he was supposed to work that switch when they had agreed, I'll handle the north and the conductor will handle the southernmost tracks? So the job briefing was not what was actually happening. So another thing to impact the conductor trainee's situational awareness. Okay, so again, note how the brackets now appear in the bottom right text here, where the green arrow is in the bottom section. And, you have to ask, were those added into the report but not part of the actual conversation or instructions to the trainee? Now, the trainee flipped the only switch he was supposed to operate per the job description. That's what he was told to work, was that switch. Now putting TS23 in reverse. He had already put it in normal position before, but now he's getting an instruction, flip the main line track switch. What was the specific instruction given to him? Was it reverse? Was it flip? What was it? Without the actual radio communications, we really have no way of confirming that. So then, while working alone in the dark, unsupervised in unfamiliar territory, when CN Rail knew he had trouble working independently and with switching operations, and when he was forced to position himself between the tracks to install the derail, then he gets killed, because there was no one looking out for that conductor trainee, as the law would have required. Okay, since I want to make sure we go through the entire report, I'm just going to go through page 5 here, the last part of the timeline, where it continues on from the bottom of this one page which was located between the rails. So he was between the rails installing the derail. Unaware of the train's approach, the trainee was struck by the train and sustained serious injuries. After striking the trainee, the train coupled heavily to the cars that had been set off on track 23. So, they hit pretty hard. The loud noise alerted the crew in the area that something may be wrong because they weren't expecting to hit anything. They were expecting to be backing up on the main line, which was supposed to be clear, to go and pick up the conductor who would have worked his way up to the main line track in order to be picked up, rather than walking all the way to the locomotives in the dark. So at about the same time, the trainee broadcasted over the radio that he was hurt. The pilot, locomotive engineer, detrained and located the trainee. So that was the guy who was familiar with the territory, experienced. He's the one who got off the train because the conductor would have been pretty far away given he was working his way up to the main track or whatever. He could have been half a mile away. So he wasn't the one that was going to be able to respond quickly to an injured conductor trainee. So the pilot engineer was the one who got off the train and ran to try to help him. So the pilot locomotive engineer detrained and located the trainee. While providing comfort and emergency first aid, the pilot locomotive engineer notified the rest of the crew to stay clear and initiate an emergency call for immediate medical assistance. So the conductor, I don't think would have been near the conductor trainee while all this is going on. And so why would the last 5 pages of the conductor witness statement been held back? What was in those 5 pages that the Government of Canada and CN did not want me to see when I requested that information via access to information? Was it that maybe he was being qualified that day when he shouldn't have been because he had 0-yard training? Because that was a rumor in the field per something I had been told by someone who worked in that same area, in someone who would have known of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And so that would have been an issue. What is the Government of Canada hiding by refusing to release the last 5 pages of the conductor witness statement? And then here, since there's so many inaccuracies and outright lies in this report, as we saw previously, it says here at the time of the accident, or I'm sorry, let's go a little further up here. So subsequently, the trainee was transported by ambulance to a hospital in Tisdale, but succumbed to his injuries while en route. And then it gives you the sunset occurred at 17:10 that day. Those 2 statements are outright lies because he did not succumb to his injuries in an ambulance. Per the health and safety officer report, which was done by Transport Canada on page 30, it states that the coroner had the chance to witness the position of the body prior to its removal, and that would have been at the scene. So he did not die in the ambulance. And that way you can't blame the ambulance crew for anything having gone wrong that they might have done. The blame is squarely, in my opinion, on CN. And it's what I call its rail partners in crime at Transport Canada. And the Transportation Safety Board and the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal and a lot of others, in my humble opinion. We'll get into all of that. Then it says the sunset occurred at 17:10 that day. No. Do a Google search for the day that conductor trainee Jason Clooney died, and you will see that is absolutely not accurate. But by making it, 17:10 instead of 16 something, then it's a little less obvious that we allowed this guy to walk off in the dark, unsupervised, when he was a conductor trainee. And, most people would probably think, okay, well, it's bad enough to let him walk off if it was light out and he could see properly, could see the switches properly, everything. But to allow him to walk off in the dark, I think most people would find that to be a much more serious offense on the part of CN Rail. Okay, so just to cover the entire report again, then they get into a conversation on the subdivision and track information where they just give you the specifics as to the track in that area. I'm not into this technical stuff as to how you build railroad tracks and whatever. So if there's any, problems with this section, that would have to be someone either in the union or who's got rail experience or in track maintenance who would have to pick those out. That's not something I could figure out. Okay, we're going to go through the rest of this presentation rather quickly. I'm going to end up coming back to these pages in a separate video, but I just want to show you again the report layout and why not have all the acts, which we don't even discuss in this report at all. Why not have acts, regulations, rules, etc. that could have played a role in the accident? Why not have them all at the beginning of the report? Have them all somewhere, or, as you're going through the report, put in brackets, Act, Railway Safety Act, Section 18 and 19. You don't see any of that in this report. All you see are operating rules that the trainee may have violated. Regulations, when they are used, I think they are used to deceive. So I'm going to be coming back to this, but I just want you to notice the report layout. So we went through the timeline. Now we go into the Canadian Rail operating rules, general operating instructions for switching operations. So I'm going to come back to this, and so I'm going to skip this for now. Okay, so, on the previous page, we saw, let's see, it was page 7. There was a little section there also on derails. Then we get into railway employee qualification standards regulations, and they go through all of this. And this we did cover in a previous video. There is one other point I need to bring up, and it has to do with potentially a manager at the controls. Because if you look at all of this stuff, and again, I'm going to come back to this, most of this has to do with locomotive engineers, not a conductor. But we're going to get into that in another report or another video. Okay, here we've got, again, I just want you to notice here, we've got pages 10 and 11 of the same report. We've covered these pages already, but what I want you to notice here is the layout. So we had way at the beginning the timeline and who was doing what at that location, and then we get into these other discussions, the derails, the the regulations. So just keep taking note of the report layout. Okay, next on pages 12 and 13, we get into the discussion not just of the trainee, but this mental model and situational awareness among operating crews. And basically this is a discussion of how well can you take in new information and adapt it and be aware of what's going on rather than being basically fixed in what you're thinking and whatever. A lot of assumptions. When you have facts and you choose to ignore those facts and leave them out of a report, and then you make up things based on your assumptions as the writer of these reports, thinking that you knew what this trainee was thinking or what his actions were. This is all an assumption. Their situational awareness discussion is an assumption. They don't know this to be a fact. What they did know to be a fact was that we had the wrong switch numbers. We had switch numbers that did not seem to match the work instructions or the operating manuals. We had a conductor trainee working alone in the dark, unsupervised, in violation of the law. There's a lot of facts that are either twisted, changed, or outright ignored in this report. And so to go ahead and make up, your little situational awareness model based on your assumptions of what you think this conductor trainee may have been thinking or doing, it's all assumption. And it's very easy to tear this stuff down in court. But, it says here on the second page, on page 13, effective situational awareness is highly dependent on switching attention between different information sources. People can get trapped in a phenomena called attention narrowing and tunneling, whereby they lock onto certain aspects of information and may then either intentionally or inadvertently stop their scanning behavior. When this occurs, their situational awareness may be very good with respect to what they are concentrating on, but will quickly become outdated with respect to other aspects they have stopped attending to, focusing on certain information and not reinstating information scanning activity can result in inaccurate situational awareness. Therefore, keeping a high level of understanding, trainees by definition would not have a high level of understanding of what is happening, is a prerequisite to being able to know what factors are more important than others. Otherwise, neglected information will result in an inaccurate situational awareness. And then we go into a derailed discussion. What I want you to note here is that there is nothing mentioned as far as the situational awareness of the supposed supervising conductor or of the two locomotive engineers. Excuse me. They all knew that this trainee was working alone, unsupervised, and that's a violation of the law. And so, what about their situational awareness? You know, where's that discussion? And before we leave the situational awareness discussion, there's one other point I want to bring up, and that's the fact that there's a reason that in the rail industry there are job briefings so that you know what you're doing specifically and the other person knows what they're doing. The entire team is supposed to know who's going to do what and whatever. And so situational awareness, as they describe it in this report, has to do with the ability to take in new facts and adapt and whatever. There's also the argument that can be made for sticking to what we have agreed to. So that's another issue that is totally ignored in this report, that there are times in safety critical functions that you have to stick to the plan. Okay, and now, so we jump from, notice how in the report they're jumping from one thing to another, to another, to another. So now we're in a derail discussion. We give you diagrams of certain types of derails and then an actual picture. That's another way, too, of changing your focus. Because an actual person, I don't know, are you going to spend more time looking at the diagram? Probably not. I don't know. I would find the picture more interesting and kind of look at even things beyond the derail. I'd be looking at, what's in the countryside and whatever's out there. So it's a way to change your focus is what I'm saying. When you're reading reports, switching back and forth between one subject versus another, jumping all over the place is a great way to change your focus. And so then you're not picking up on as many of the lies and inconsistencies in some of these reports. And that's what I want you to notice here. Okay, so what I want you to notice here again has to do with the report layout. When we were discussing the timeline and what happened during the accident, that was back on page 4, 5, those pages. We are now on page 16. So why isn't this discussion closer to what had happened in the timeline and stuff? So that's what we need to understand as far as how these reports are written and why that brainwashing is so easy to do, because you split the topics, I mean, I hope that by now you're starting to see how people get brainwashed in these reports, whether or not it's, singular versus plural, a switcheroo as far as conductor versus on-the-job trainer, the made-to-fit definitions. There are so many tricks that are used. Outright lies, he didn't die in the ambulance, deceptions, because we can say that all times are estimated, so we can estimate the sunset rather than providing you the real time of the sunset, which is an absolutely known fact. So why give us an estimate? Because then you can play with the timeline like an accordion to give the story that you want to give. And that's what is happening throughout this report. And I hope you're seeing that now. Okay, so when it comes to situational awareness, you need to ask yourself, could the following impact conductor trainees' situational awareness? One, wrong switch numbers. For example, TS 21, 22, and 23 instead of TS 12, 13, and 15, which is how it appears the other crew members referred to these switches. For sure, the supervising conductor, per his witness statements, used TS 12 and 13, and the others who would not be on the ground referred to TS 15. So would that potentially impact the conductor trainee's switch situational awareness? How about working alone without a supervising conductor in violation of SOR 87-150, Section 5? What about working in the dark? Would that impact your situational awareness? Absolutely. What about being in unfamiliar territory? Absolutely. Conductor trainee Jason Clooney had difficulty with working alone and with switching operations. These were facts that were known to CN Rail. So would that have impacted his situational awareness if it was clear that he already had problems with that? Probably. In the job briefing done prior to arriving at that location, all agreed in violation of SOR 87-150 Section 5 that the conductor trainee Jason Clooney would handle the interchange track, only one track, which has only one switch, TS23, referred to by all other crew members in their witness statements as TS15, making it such that conductor trainee Jason Clooney had no reason to think he would be handling any other switch. And that's why you have a job briefing. So the situational thing, awareness is all real nice, but it's all assumptions. You know, when you exclude facts to replace them with assumptions, there's a problem with that. So the supervising conductor was, per the job briefing, supposed to handle the elevator tracks, and those would have used switches TS22 and TS21. They were both for the elevator tracks, and as such, conductor trainee Jason Clooney had no reason to believe that he would be handling these switches. And then the supervising, again, that was per the job briefing. The supervising conductor had been the one to reverse TS22 to set off the rail cars in the elevator tracks. It appears that when told to line the mainline switch, technically there were two mainline switches, TS22 and TS23, as both touched the main line, but that the switch number as to which switch to line may not have been specified because it was added in with brackets in the report by the authors. Why was that in brackets? Was the track switch number TS22 specified as the switch that conductor trainee Jason Clooney was supposed to put in normal position? And then points 10 and 11 here. I'm not covering in this video. It's going to be part of other videos, but you're not going to want to miss those. Per the Health and Safety Officer report, the test question on why the need to check the points had not been properly updated as it was supposed to be. And so many frontline rail workers thought one had to check the points for ice, as opposed to checking the points for the rails for proper train movement direction to ensure that when you line a switch, you've got it so that the train is going to be going where you want it to go. So that's going to be a discussion we're going to get into as we get into the Health and Safety Officer report. And another very critical discussion that would impact situational awareness for the trainee has to do with what I call deadly training slide number 53. And that's going to be discussed in a separate video, and you're not going to want to miss that one. That would definitely impact a trainee's situational awareness. Okay, so this concludes part 8 of our brainwashing series. And again, like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you remain subscribed. And have a great day. I'll see you on the next one.